Recently, I've been musing as to how to turn something fairly unfortunate into something productive and, more importantly, instructive. So the long and short of it is that a little over a week ago, I had a semi-serious accident and I broke my right hand. Specifically, I fractured several of the metacarpal bones in my hand. Those are the bones right below the fingers. And my right hand now is basically completely useless. I'm effectively disabled. What's more, I am right-handed, which is interesting, I guess you could say. Now, I know, of course, on YouTube, everyone is 6'3" and everyone is a multimillionaire, and of course, everyone is ambidextrous, but I am neither a multimillionaire nor 6'3", nor am I ambidextrous. My right hand is definitely more efficient, more potent than my left hand, and basically is taking a toll on everything. Everything I do takes roughly twice as long, if not longer in some cases, and indeed my work outside of Thinking-Ape requires a lot of typing, a lot of moving the mouse, and all I have is my left hand, so you can imagine that too takes much longer. There's some things I simply cannot do, and other things are doable, but like I said, they just take much, much longer, rendering everything I do less efficient. And if I'm really lucky, I might make a semi-full recovery in 8 weeks. I'm wearing a cast on my right hand, but more likely is that I have a cast for 8 weeks, then I have to engage in rehabilitation because there will be considerable atrophy in the right hand, which could probably take up to something like an extra month. And if I'm really, really unlucky, the whole process could take 4 months. So something like 10 to 16 weeks. And hopefully, at least at the end of the 4 months, I will have a fully functional, fully healed right hand back. It's a bit ironic because 2 weeks before I decided to go back to the gym for the first time in something like over 4 years. And now I'm considering how I might train with only my left side and my legs. Certainly doable, but difficult and annoying to say the least. Now, I'm not telling you this to necessarily garner sympathy, although sympathy, of course, is appreciated, nor am I doing this just to whinge and tell you a sob story. I want to turn this into something more interesting, productive, and instructive. I want to talk about baselines, contentment, happiness, and the assumptions we make about the world. Now, in my previous video about Dr. Disrespect, somebody left a comment that I thought was quite interesting, and the guy was a Dutch guy who was 6'4", and he made a comment, I'm paraphrasing here, to the effect of, why are you guys making such a big deal about being 6? I'm 6'4", it's not a big deal. Lots of guys in the Netherlands are 6'4". By the way, comments noted subscribers, yes, Dr. Disrespect is 6'8" and not 6'4". I didn't know that. But the Dutch guy made the comment in a very nonchalant manner, and I just thought, interesting. Now, I responded to him in a number of comments. The only one he responded to was the fact that, yes, there are certain health issues that might arise due to back pain and some other things, but I pointed out to him, in fact, that his baseline is him being 6'4", and he doesn't know life any differently. Now, imagine if you were 5'4" as a man, life would be very different. But he can't imagine that. It wasn't a very well thought out comment, I have to admit, on his part, because it was this classic example of the problem of self-extrapolation. He thought people talking about someone who's 6'4" isn't a big deal because he himself is 6'4". It kind of reminds you of really rich people saying, oh, money isn't everything, it's not that important. Well, that's because they have tons of money and they don't need to worry about it. But what is the point of this, ultimately? The point of all this is that we all have a certain baseline in our lives. And the longer we've lived with that baseline, the more we make assumptions about the normative value of that baseline. In the case of the Dutch gentleman, for him it's totally normal and normative to be 6'4", and to view other people of that stature to be perfectly normal as well. But of course, that's not the norm, say, in the United States, and it's certainly not the norm in places like Cambodia or Peru or Ecuador, where the national average for a man is something like 5'4", 5'5". Very, very different indeed. But the longer we've experienced a baseline, the more we assume it to be normal, and the more we take it for granted. You see this across the board with virtually everything. Children born into extremely wealthy families, they're used to a standard of living, to a level of money the vast majority of us can only dream of. They're used to observing their parents spending hundreds of dollars on meals, going out. Maybe when they were 17, they received a very expensive car from their father. And their baseline, as they enter their 20s and 30s, is just very different from somebody who grows up in poverty with much, much less. So your baseline defines how you view the world and what you think of the world with respect to your own life, and how you stand in this world with respect to other people, which in turn, by dint of comparison, helps define how you feel about the world. Are you content? Are you discontent? Now, of course, there are other factors here. Individual psychology is a huge one, but you do need a mode of comparison. Your baseline compared to everything else. In my own case, for example, I've gone my entire life being right-handed and having access to both hands and arms. I am now one-handed and one-armed, only temporarily, at least I hope, and so my baseline has been completely shattered. I went almost 50 years of my life taking for granted the autonomy and use of two free hands. Now, the vast majority of you out there do the exact same thing because it's generally not a big deal to have two free working hands and arms. But when you're right-handed and you're deprived of that hand and the arm by extension, then you realize all the things you've been taking for granted. Now, why mention this? Well, I've talked about baselines, right? The thing is, after wearing this cast for about a week, I am slowly entering some kind of acceptance mode where I am very limited, I'm disabled, I have to use my left arm and hand for everything, and I'm just not as self-sufficient as I was before. It's a noticeable difference, to say the least. Now, let's assume I do make a good recovery, and within 10 weeks, that's probably the best prognosis, I'm able to fully use my right hand again, I can grip weights, I can do everything. Well, for a while, I will be grateful. For a while, I will wonder and observe and puzzle at how amazing it is to be able to move the mouse and type, to be able to open jars and carry groceries with my right hand. More importantly, to be able to write with my right hand. I had to fill out a bunch of forms by hand recently, and I basically had to preface it before sending it off to the authorities that my handwriting looks like a child's because I am right-handed and I broke my hand, that sort of thing. So I will have a moment of deep contentment at regaining the use of my right hand and doing all the things I've done for virtually my entire life. The question is, though, moving from the now disabled baseline to the non-disabled baseline, assuming it all goes smoothly, and I pray to the gods that it does, how long will this epiphany last? How long will this state of appreciation and gratitude last before I re-enter into a state of psychological homeostasis with respect to the use of both hands? Probably not that long. I remember about 10 years ago, give or take, I had an inguinal hernia, and I was out of commission in terms of heavy lifting stuff for about 2 months plus, give or take. And during that time, predictably, I had a moment of realization and epiphany, and I thought to myself, I will really appreciate this, and I will remember. Going back even further, about 15 years, I had a benign tumor removed from my salivary glands in my neck, and I had the same thought process. However, in the case of my broken hand, I have none of the illusions, or delusions for that matter, concerning some grand realization. I know almost certainly I will go back to a new baseline, and within short order, everything will return to what I had always thought and taken for granted, that is, the use of two healthy hands and the ability to manipulate objects in this world, just as you assume that every day if you have two working hands. I will return to that state. I am sure of it. And though I can certainly learn lessons from, say, having an accident and similar such things, and gain some kind of insight or knowledge from this particular experience, it will return to baseline. And this is why human beings functionally can never really be content. Now, part of that is just evolution at work. We didn't evolve for some state of contentment or quote-unquote happiness. We evolved to survive, if we're lucky, and pass on our genes. Nature does not care about our contentment. There are, even as I speak, people that are utterly miserable, that are drug addicts. They're deeply unpleasant people, but they have 12 children. And from an evolutionary lens, they are successes, even if they are drug-addled and addicted and very unhappy in their lives. If the baseline persists long enough, you will come to accept it as a norm, and you will no longer be able to be content with it. If you happen upon vast amounts of money suddenly, your life will temporarily change, maybe even for a year, but eventually you will get used to it. Eventually, homeostasis will kick in, and you will soon forget your previous life. And most interestingly, you will start wanting for more. As a general principle, this does not apply to every human on Earth, but to most humans. You will realize, oh, I have this, but I want this as well. People call it the hedonic treadmill. That's partly true. It's more just a treadmill, period. It's a treadmill that never stops until you cease to beat, unfortunately, because the baseline and habit and custom always win. This is why, for example, in certain religious contexts, particularly in a Christian context, you see a lot of people straining themselves to engage in so-called gratitude exercises, to be thankful for what God purportedly has given them. People always want more than their baseline. It's also why, I'm sure you've heard this, certain things don't work psychologically. If you tell somebody, for example, who's just been divorced, they've lost their job, and their mother just died of cancer, you say, well, it's not all bad. You still have a roof over your head, and you have food on the table. That almost certainly will not make him feel better about his circumstances. It almost never does. People in their early 20s or late teens, in many cases, cannot even imagine what it's like to approach 50. They can't even imagine that's even possible because their baseline is completely different. And of course, this ties deeply into the problem of self-extrapolation, something I've talked about a lot on this channel, but it's a recurring theme because it dominates human thought, human psychology, and human interaction. So of course, I'm talking about it here. But this constant taking for granted of our baseline and never looking below our baseline and always wanting more than our current baseline and then achieving it and then accepting that baseline and then moving on and then wanting more from that baseline and the next baseline. This is why contentment, happiness, if you will, apart from obvious evolutionary reasons, is basically impossible to achieve for the vast, vast majority of people. It's just how we're wired. And so whilst now in this current moment of this readjustment to a hopefully temporary baseline of only having one hand and one arm, I'm fully cognizant of the fact that later on, I will forget that for the most part, assuming I recover properly, and go back to baseline and then wish and want for things that are in excess of that baseline. Human nature, gentlemen. It really sucks quite a bit. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons on Patreon. You guys are the lifeblood of the channel. Without you, the channel could not exist. And many special thanks to my donors on PayPal as well. As for everybody else, if you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, the usual YouTube jazz. It doesn't seem to do a darn thing for me, but do it anyway. It's much appreciated. And if I'm still alive, I'll check out next time. Until then, may the gods watch over you, and may you fully enjoy the use of both your hands that you have taken for granted your entire life. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.